When you summarize time series data in a pivot chart, you might want to add a trend line to see what your data would look like in the future if current trends continue. In this movie, I will show you how to add a trend line to your pivot chart so that you can make that type of forecast. I'll use the trendline sample file, which you can find in the Chapter 6 folder of your exercise files archive. This pivot chart summarizes quarterly sales data for a number of departments in a company, but I have filtered the pivot chart so that it only displays data for one department, in this case the sport department, just to simplify the chart that we'll create. To add a trend line to the pivot chart, first you click the pivot chart, and then click the Chart Elements button. Doing so displays the chart elements list, and you can go down to the trendline item and check its box to display the trend line in the body of the pivot chart. This trend line shows what sales would have looked like if they continued according to the average. So in other words, sales would have increased, but you wouldn't have had the fluctuations between the quarters. If you want to hide a trend line, then just clear the checkbox. Now let's say that you want to forecast into the future. To do that, again, click Chart Elements to show the list, point at trend line, and then click the arrow that appears to the side of it. Then, in the flyout list that appears, click More Options. Doing so displays the Format Trendline dialog box, and you can see adds a trend line to the body of the pivot chart. The first thing you need to do is to set the trendline options, and that means choosing the data type. Unless you're working with scientific data, and you know that your data follows one of the other distributions, such as exponential or power distribution, you should leave linear selected. It's by far the most common, and pretty much all business data will follow a linear distribution. Then you can add forecast elements to the trend line. To do that, scroll down, and in the forecast group, you can select how many periods you want to look forward. Remember that in this pivot chart, each period is a quarter. So let's forecast 2 quarters into the future. To do that, you edit the value in the forward box from 0.0 to 2 and press enter. And you can see the change in the pivot chart on the left side of the screen. Now you can change the trend line's formatting. To do that, move up and click the fill and line icon just below trend line options. Now you can make all sorts of changes to the trend line that you've added, and in this case I'll just change the color. So I'll click the color control and I'll change it to a bright red. You can see that change in the body of the pivot chart, and when I click the Format Trendline pane's close button, you can see the entire trend line extending out 2 quarters and showing what sales would look like if current trends were to continue. Like most forecasting tools, trend lines are best to give you a rough idea of what your data might look like if current trends continue. There are no guarantees, of course, but it's one way to look at your data, and it might give you some useful insights.